This is First Thursday Mystery, month 7. This month we are going to be doing 2 different blocks. The first one is the F block, and the second one is the L block. So for our F block, or the friendship block, we have one piece that the pattern is calling a beige strip, and it is a few inches longer than what the pattern calls for. And then we have 12 different colored squares. The first thing we're going to cut is 12 1 1/8 inch strips from our beige fabric. You really don't need to straighten your long edges because we will be trimming later. So since this was a stripe, I'm just going to straighten up one short edge, and then I'm going to start cutting my 1 1/8 inch strips. I am not at home, so I do not have all my rulers with me, so I don't have one long enough to do the whole 12 strips all at once, but I do have a 12-inch ruler with me. So I'm going to start, and I can cut 10 of them, I think. I'm going to start with 11 1/4, and don't worry about your lines up here. I'm keeping this one straight, which is a little bit weird since I'm so used to keeping it all straight. And I'm going to cut it off at 11 1/4. Then I'm going to scoot the ruler back to 10 1/8, and we are doing 1/8 inch increments, so you're going to need to pay attention. So I got my short end lined up at 10 1/8, cut. Then I'm going to back it off to 9 and cut, and 7 7/8. So cut, then back to 6 3/4. And then 5 5/8. And then 4 1/2. And I did calculate all these ahead of time and wrote them down. 4 1/2, then 3 3/8. And then 2 1/4, and finally 1 1/8. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, maybe that's only 9. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nope, there are 10 there, so then I just need to cut 2 more. So I'm going to line it up at the 2 1/4 mark. And cut, and then back it off to the 1 1/8. And then you're going to have all this as extra, so if you miscut, you actually have enough to do a couple extras. Our next step is to take our 12 colored squares, and we're going to divide them into 4 groups of 3 each. And they're going to be divided by color, so this pile is my purples, this pile is my blues, this pile is my yellows or cheddars, and this pile is the red and the pink. The pattern is recommending that we cut them all at once. If you are uncomfortable doing that, then you can cut them one at a time. I am going to cut my stacks of 3 at once. So the first thing we're going to do is cut these into squares that are 3 1/2 inches square. So you have plenty here to do it. I'm going to center, so we're going to cut off as usual our 2 edges to straighten everything up, and then we can rotate the mat, which is usually a good idea if you're cutting a stack of things. And then it's 3 1/2. Let me just double check. Yep. So I'm going to line my 3 1/2 inch mark up here, and trim. Now, we are going to cut these in half to make triangles, but it is a little different than usual. We are going to line up our ruler with the 1/4 inch on the points. So like this and this. So there and there. So one triangle is going to be smaller and the other one's going to not be exactly a triangle. So once you're sure you have your 1/4 inch lined up here and here, we're just going to cut. There's that stack, and let me do one more, but they're all cut exactly the same way. So I'm not going to cut all 4 of them on camera. So we're making 3.5 inch squares. So I'm cutting to square up 2 sides, and we're going to rotate the mat. And line up my 3.5 on both the edges I just straightened. Cut. And then it's my 1/4 inch line on my ruler here and here, and it's lining up on the point. So there's the point, there's the point. I want to cut 1/4 inch beyond the point, and there's my 2 pieces out of the square. So cut the other 2 stacks that way as well. My next step is to take the smaller of the blue triangles, and I'm going to sew a beige strip to the long edge of it. So that would be the edge with the bias. It should pretty well center there. After we have sewn the beige strip to the small side of the blue triangle, we're going to press toward the beige strip, and you're going to do exactly the same thing on the purple. Sew a beige strip to the long side of the smaller purple triangle. Then we are going to come back in, and you want to match so it's the same color on both sides, and put the bigger triangle on the other side. So we're going to just again sew 1/4 inch and do it for all the blues and the purples. I've stitched both sides on the purple and the blue sets, and this time for our big one, we are pressing away from the beige strip toward the large triangle that we just added. Now we're going to take our orange, as the pattern says, we're using cheddar, and our pink red sets, we're going to use the large triangle first this time, and we're going to go exactly like we did last time and sew a beige strip onto the long side of each of the remaining large triangles for this block. I've sewn my beige strip to the large triangles on the red, pink, and the orange units, and this time again I pressed toward the beige unit with the first triangle put on. So from the large triangle to the beige unit, and then once again we are matching our fabrics, and we are going to sew the small triangle to the other side. I've sewn my small triangles on to the other side of the beige strip now, and this time I'm pressing out toward the small. So on the blue and the purple, our seams are going toward the big triangle, and on the orange or the cheddar and the pink and red, they are going towards the small triangle. Now we are going to trim all of these up to 2.5 inches square. If you bought the block lock ruler, you can use it on this. We want the point of our square to be on the long side. It's going to be where the long triangle matches up with the beige strip. So we have plenty of room here to trim. So I'm going to trim first with the block lock ruler. So it's 2.5 inches that we're trimming down to. Here and here. And then I'm going to rotate the block and line up the 2.5 inch mark here and here. And again, make sure your point is going to be on the side with the long triangle. I mean, it's going to be, the point is going to be where the big triangle is matching the beige. So when I have my 2.5 inches, then I can go ahead and cut the other 2 sides. So we want them all to look like this. Now, if you didn't get the block lock ruler, you can use a square ruler. So, again, we want our point to be on the seam where the large triangle matches the beige triangle. So I'm going to, if I use a square ruler, I can line up my 45-degree line with that seam, trim, trim, then rotate, and I want again my 45-degree line on that seam, and I'm going to put not 2 3/4, 2 1/2 here and here on this side, the two sides that I already trimmed. When you've got it, trim and trim. So you're going to trim all of your squares like that. So my point is always on the seam where the large triangle is matching the beige strip. We're going to take our trimmed squares and lay out 3 blocks. Each block will have one of each color grouping. We want our orange or our cheddar diagonally across from our red or our pink, like here, and we want our blue and our purple across from each other diagonally because our seams are going in opposite directions. So you can arrange them any grouping you want, but you just want one of each color group in them, in each block, and then we're going to take it and sew pairs together. Every pair you sew together is going to have either a cheddar, which is the orange in the pattern, or a red pink. So we're going to press toward those, toward the cheddar or toward the red or pink. So away from the purple and away from the blue. So now we are ready to sew our pairs together into a 4-patch. The seams are going to be going opposite directions because remember, since the pink or the red and the orange or the cheddar are being pressed toward that, and they're on opposite corners, and our seams are going to be opposite directions, so they should nest and go together very easily. These are 4-patch blocks, so I am going to pop my seam. Remember, we're going to fold across the last seam we stitched. It will only work one way. If you go that way, nothing happens, but if I go that way, it pops a couple of stitches, and then I can press it with the seams going in a pinwheel, and I form a small 4-patch here in the center. Here's one that's already pressed. And that finishes our friendship blocks. You should have 3 of them, and they should be 4 1/2 inches at this point. The L block is the log patch or Lincoln logs. It is constructed the same way as a log cabin, only we're not going to have lights and darks on opposite corners of the blocks. The pattern says you have 7 of each piece of fabric. You do not. You have 5. We are only going to need 5 blocks to put the finished quilt together, so we are not making 7 blocks. So you have 5 squares, 5 sort of medium length strips, and 5 longer strips. We are going to trim our 5 squares down to 1 1/2 inches square. As always, I'm living dangerously and cutting all of them at once. If you're not comfortable doing that, then by all means, cut them one at a time. Trim 2 sides to get my straight edges. And I really should do the mat, but again, I'm going to live dangerously. 1 1/2 inches, so I'm going to line that up on the 2 edges that I just cut. And double check. Yep, 1 1/2 inches. And trim and trim. So my medium length strip, which is a little bit over 8 1/2 inches, I'm going to trim down to 1 inch wide. So what I'm cutting all of them at once, so I have them stacked up. Your strips are actually about 2 inches wide, so you should have plenty of room to clean them up. And I'm going to trim just one short edge. And these are a little bit long to be flipping around without doing the mat, so there we go. And And I'm going to line up my 1 inch mark with the edge that I just clean cut. And I'm going to line up my short edge, align with my short edge that I also straightened, and trim. Now I need to get a 2.5, 2 2-inch segments, and 1 1.5 segment off of here. So I can, that is going to add up to 8 inches. I'm going to line my 8-inch mark up with my straight short edge and trim. And then I'm going to move my ruler back 2.5 inches to the 5.5 inch mark. So that will give me my 2.5 inch piece down here. And then just to make life a little easier, I'm going to move back to the 4-inch mark instead of doing it exactly like the diagram and the pattern, which will give me my 1.5 inch section. And then I'm going to move the ruler back to the 2-inch mark, and that will give me my 2 2-inch sections. So that's the pieces I need out of the medium-sized strips. My longest strip, I need a 1-inch wide strip, and then I need 2 3-inch sections, 1 3.5-inch section, and 1 2.5 section off of that, which adds up to 12 inches, which is lucky because the longest ruler I brought with me on this trip was 12 inches. So I'm going to trim one long side, trim off a short side, and rotate the mat. And then I need to trim this down to 1 inch by 12, which I don't usually like to use the end of my ruler as my outside measurement, but we're going to today. Trim, trim. Oops. Maybe we'll trim. Okay. Then I'm going to back this up to 12 minus 2.5 would be 9.5. And trim, so that gives me my 2.5-inch section, and then minus 3.5, I'm going to back up to the 6-inch mark, and trim, and then back to the 3-inch mark, which will give me my last 2 3.5-inch sections. And that's all my cutting for this block. Our first step for sewing is to take our 1.5-inch squares, which is going to be the center, and then we're going to sew our 1.5 by 1 inch piece onto the edge of that. That was cut from our medium size strip. You can put any combination you want together. Doesn't make any difference. This is the combination I'm going to do. I've sewn my rectangles onto my squares. We're going to press away from the square. The next piece that goes on should be the same color as the last rectangle we put on. It should be one of the 2-inch pieces from our medium size. So it's going to be looking like this. I sewed my second rectangle on, and again we're pressing away from the center. Then we're going to add the other 2-inch section that matches the fabrics we just put on to all 5 pieces. Okay, once again I pressed away from the center, and now we're going to add our final piece that matches everything else we've done around the outside edge, and it's the 2.5-inch long one. Okay, once again I pressed away from the center, and now we're ready to go on to our next strips. This time I want the 2.5 inch long piece. Again, you can put whatever ones you want around whichever others. This is a combination I'm going to do. So we're just going to add it on, and I'm adding it on to the same side as my first short piece was. Probably not that big a deal if you don't, but if you want to keep it the way the pattern is, that's what you'll want to do. Once again, I pressed away from the center. Now we're going to take our 3-inch pieces, we have one of them from each color, and again it's the same color all the way around as the first one we put down. So we just keep going like we did on the last round. Press away from the center, and we're adding the last 3-inch section to the next side of this piece. So when we're adding these pieces, I've done that one and that one, I always add after the last piece I put on so it's touching it. Once again, press away from the center, and then we are adding our last strip, which is 3.5 inches long, to our last side of our Lincoln logs. Here are the finished log patches or Lincoln logs. The final seam was also pressed away from the center, so we were always pressing away from the center. These squares should be 3.5 inches square.